realized that over time, what was happening is I was assuming I had to show up in one way when I actually had all the power in the world to choose to do it in a way that aligned for me professionally and personally. I just didn't give myself permission to.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. I'm Dr. Megan Sprinkle. We are all about showing you possibilities in life and career in veterinary medicine. I want you to find where you thrive. But have you ever felt a little stuck? Felt a little frustrated that things just don't seem to be going the way you'd like them to be? Have you ever wondered if you were getting in your own way? In this episode with our guest, Dr. Corey Blake, we are going to talk about helping you get empowered in finding work that fulfills you, including helping you evolve the work along with you. We also talk a lot about leadership, which, as Corey says, so much about leadership is an inside job. Dr. Corey Blake graduated from Tufts Vet School in 2002 with a passion for exotics, and she went into a practice where she started the exotics department from scratch. 10 years later, she opened her own practice that was 50% small animal and 50% exotics, located on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. This is really when she started to understand leadership and the importance of empowering your team for success. Her passion for leadership and personal fulfillment led her to become a coach focused on helping mission-driven women thrive personally and professionally. But how did she do all this? Well, let's get to the conversation with Dr. Corey Blake. When did you know that you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I always wanted to do something with animals, and I went back and forth, right? But I never knew I wanted to be a vet until probably a junior in college. And then I literally decided, applied, got in, went. So it was a pretty last minute decision on my part.
So what was it as a junior in college that was like, this is what I want to do with my life, or at least the next step?
So if anyone would have asked me that question years ago, I would have said that it was vet med kept me engaged, right? Like never got bored when I was working with animals, or like I had worked at a zoo at that point, and it was something that I was really passionate about, conservation medicine. It was a fun environment. But it was really around I was engaged. And I noticed that so many other things didn't hold my attention. So that's probably the first thing that I would have resonated with. But as I've kind of progressed through my career, and really just in the last few years, I've started to realize that the thing that really drew me to veterinary medicine was really translating. So translating understandings. Now I do a lot of that in coaching for between people, but I think I really was translating animal needs into helping their owners understand what was needed for them. And that I think was really what drew me into it in the first place. Just funny because I don't think I was really cognizant of that for a very long period of time.
Yeah. I think that's why kind of reflecting on some of these things is fun to better understand ourselves and what we kind of saw in the moment. And I also started with a love in zoo and conservation and loved the people I worked with in those areas. And as a healthcare team, when you're working with the keepers, which were some of the most fun people to work with, they are a little bit like owners. Mm-hmm. They love those animals. They love those animals, and they want to do absolutely the best for them. Actually, just got back from AAVN, the nutrition conference, and we had a zoo nutritionist come and speak, and she even described some of those situations of this was what they were asked to do, but they really wanted to give the animal a treat, so they did this. So there is still a lot of conversation and communication within the zoo and conservation world as well. I have also found over the years that there's a lot of people who that initially was what they thought they were going to do in veterinary medicine, was go into zoo and wildlife, and things happen. You didn't stray too far from it, but what was you're going in thinking, I'm going to do wildlife? What was vet school like for you? And how did how you saw yourself in veterinary medicine evolve during that time?
So in vet school, I had kind of a non-traditional, so I did my first year of vet school in Indiana at Purdue, and then I transferred to Tufts. So my first year of vet school was very much around the realization that the programming that I wanted wasn't where I was. And so I transitioned to Tufts, which actually was really cool for me because it the group of people that was at Tufts was much more aligned with like where I was going because there was such a wildlife focus. So that was really cool for me to be able to recognize like how it resonated. There were tons of things I learned in my first year. It was such a valuable experience. And it was really cool to realize, okay, this is a place that has a lot of value and it's not the direction that I want to go in. So I was able to kind of make that shift on my own, even within vet school. But I spend most of my time in like the med wildlife and conservation in vet school. So that for me was like totally where my heart space was. And it was a really interesting kind of reckoning, I guess I want to say, like transitioning from school out into medicine, where I was offered positions in med and I couldn't take them. I couldn't even afford to pay my student loans on them. So there was a bit of a reckoning for me around like, what is my life going to look like in practice? So I ended up choosing to go into small animal medicine in a way that would give me a really great immersive experience, similar to an internship where I was working at a really huge practice. We were doing on-call 7 days a week, 24/7. So it really, I think the choices that I made gave me the experiences I needed to know how to find the information that I needed, to know I could be successful, to know how to reach out to specialists and work together with them so that I could be doing the medicine that I needed to do. And I don't think I would have become the vet that I am now without having been put in that circumstance, right? Like I think I really needed to go through that first experience, to work in referral practice, to really understand what I was capable of and to know what I could handle. Those kind of like the situations where we don't always anticipate that we're getting what we want can often serve us the best.
Yeah. We talked about having this plan, and a lot of us think it needs to go perfectly. And sometimes when we get a little off that plan, we find out, oh, this is actually better. And so I think that's important to acknowledge. And it sounds like a big part of finding this was building a community around you to help you learn and gain the skills and knowledge that to be the veterinarian that you wanted to be. You still stayed very much close to the exotics as well as cats and dogs. I talk to a lot of people who are very interested in exotics, and so I'm sure they would love to know how you were able to do both.
As far as exotics go, I really kind of leaned into what I needed, right? So when I got out of school, the practice that I started at didn't do exotics, but I was able to start that service there and reach out to the local specialists and work with them so that I was growing my knowledge while I was practicing because I didn't have a mentor in that space. And I was able to grow that to the point, my knowledge to the point to develop a reputation to the point where I actually was hired as a referral exotics doctor at the local referral hospital and ran that service for 4 years. So working intimately with the specialists that were like within a few hours of me made all the difference in the world to be able to basically align Phil with the things that were important to me from a caseload perspective. From a practice ownership perspective, I had worked in referral practice, and then in that referral practice was a 24/7 practice. So I worked in 2 hospitals like that and ran the emergency department of one of them and then ran exotics. And I had kids, right? So that job was perfect for me when my kids were little because I could work like 2 shifts a week, 16 to 18-hour shifts overnight and be done, and then have the rest of the week with the kid. And when they hit school age, they were 5 years old, and all of a sudden, my schedule ended up being something where I was working opposite. Like I was working when they were home instead of being home when they were home. And so that for me was a big turning point because I was really happy in referral and emergency practice. I enjoyed the medicine. I loved the stimulation, but it ended up being a choice for me around where's the freedom? Where do I get to continue to grow? Where do I get to do what I need to do for myself and my family and actually expand? Because it became a place of greater security for my family too. So I actually started a practice from scratch. And it was nice because I had been doing all this referral work for exotics. And so it was easy to continue that. So I still had like 50% because the local emergency hospital didn't want to do them without me there. So they just were like, go ahead. So it was kind of like a win-win that we were able to continue that service. And then I was able to kind of create a schedule that was much more aligned to what I needed as a mom and as a human being, right? Like not just as a vet.
Well, and I think people worry. I mean, that's the dream, right? Is like, how can I continue to grow myself as a professional in this career that, I've wanted to do for a while and I'm really excited about, and still also experience the family life that I would really like too, that makes me my full human. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to compromise. And I'm sure there is going to be a little bit of compromising here and there in life. But how did you kind of sit down and be able to look at all these things that are valuable and meaningful for you and find something that seemed to fit as well as you just described?
I think that it was really giving myself permission. And it's not, I don't want to say that I was perfect at this because I wasn't. Like there was definitely a lot of struggle for me around where are my boundaries and where am I going to allow myself to do what I need to do in this moment. Especially, the work that I do now is so much related to like working with purpose-driven women leaders. And so that's who I am and who I was, right? And it's very hard for us when we have this calling, this need to serve, to take care of animals, to be actually able to say, like, I need to take a lunch or I need to go home and not open my computer all weekend long. Like, that's necessary for me. It becomes this kind of like values conflict. So it took me years to kind of like figure out how do I work with that, because I realized that over time, what's happening is I was assuming I had to show up in one way when I actually had all the power in the world to choose to do it in a way that aligned for me professionally and personally. I just didn't give myself permission to.
Mm. I think that is a lot of what we started to talk about in our pre-call is around empowerment and this mindset of you do have the power to decide what all of this looks like. And I think being a professional, there's this image of what we should do or what things should look like. And I think we're in a big time. I'm really excited that we're in this era of veterinary medicine where we're really starting to, I think, re-examine what these shoulds really are. And so I think it takes a lot of work because I think it's kind of drilled into us for a really long time. And we have to understand that life doesn't work that way. I think when you understand the empowerment side of it, gives you so much more freedom to really be able to get more curious, ask more questions, and explore things that allow you to start discovering what feels right and allows you to thrive. Kind of back to that, when we start to get off the path a little bit, that this perfect golden path of the should, if we start to get off it a little bit, we actually realize, oh, that feels so much better. Like I feel like I'm thriving so much better in that. So let's go back a little bit. You're owning your own practice. You're realizing where you're thriving. And then, as we mentioned, you start to pivot your career a little bit. So let's talk about that path. In a practice, this is where you started to learn a little bit more around leadership because you have full responsibility of now this full practice. I think it ended up being like 15 members of the team, something like that. So what were you discovering as you're a practice owner, you're putting all of this together from scratch and now having to lead a pretty good sized team?
Yeah, it sounded easier than it was. So like, I think I felt very solid in my medical skills, right? And it felt like I understood management and leadership. And I think that happens for all of us. Like we think we get something and then we do it and we're like, oh, but we're cheap. But I realized. So what came for me in the first, I think, few years of owning a practice was the understanding that management and leadership are two very different animals. And that I understood how to manage, but I didn't really understand how to lead as well as I thought I did. And so I started, typical veterinarian, pouring myself into learning more about it, right? Which took me on a really super cool path. It definitely, like, in order to start pouring myself into it, I had to hit a rock bottom. Like, there was this place of like, I have done everything that I know how to do and I am miserable. And I was able to kind of get to that point and then pivot so that that way I could recognize what I was struggling with and actually honor it and then do something about it, which was really powerful for me. It was a spot where I was, instead of running away from what I was feeling, I was actually looking at it and listening and then making a shift. So when I did that, I was able to lean into leadership in a way that was so much more powerful than me trying to learn everything I could about it. Because so much about leadership is an inside job, right? It's like how we're showing up, how we're feeling about ourselves, whether we can be authentic and vulnerable with our teams, whether we can communicate in a way that people can hear us, like what sort of energy are we bringing to the situation? And what I realized is that no matter how much education I did about management and leadership, et cetera, it didn't matter unless I figured out what was going on for me internally and figured out how to work with that. So that was a huge, huge shift for me. So I started working with an executive leadership coach as part of that journey and fell in love with the process, because what that did for me is it allowed me to really figure out what it was I wanted, figure out how what I was doing was different from that, be able to become more authentic with my team, and to create actual connections with them as opposed to just being the one who was dictating. I was able to create a system that is so much more organic and culturally beneficial because I did the inner work. And that shifted the entire way that I show up as a leader. And it made it so much easier. You know, before I felt like I had to hold the wall all the time. Like I was constantly searching for what needed to be fixed. Now I get to lean back into it. When I'm working at the hospital, I can lean back and watch the team that I've cultivated do their thing. They're empowered to do what they want to do and to have the right conversation to move the ball forward. It's a whole different dynamic. So that became the sweet spot for me. And it was so exciting to watch people shift from this place of, I'm not sure what to do, needing to be guided, into being empowered, and to see a team in that way was like incredible for me. And to watch the leaders on my team be able to kind of level into the place of holding that is just super cool. So that's kind of where I've pivoted into, is to really helping people figure out their clarity around what it is they're doing, and then helping them to recognize what they need to do or want to do internally so they can show up and have the experience that they want to have in veterinary medicine or otherwise. Taking ourselves off autopilot, because so much we've been just running, right? And that's so much of what we do.
Yeah. Constantly running like a treadmill. And I heard you talk about this similarly on another podcast about how really it's working on yourself. That's the key to the leadership and everything else. And I think that's also, we're problem solvers. So a lot of it is like fixing the things around us instead of realizing that, oh, if I just like took care of myself and understood myself better, and that the self work, everything else seems to flow a little easier instead of just always feeling like you have to hold up walls or fix things like you were talking about. So I think that's also another key to this empowerment mindset, is really understanding what you can control and really taking care of yourself is going to actually help everything else around you that you're wanting to see happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you're broken either, right? Like that's the thing. It's like we don't have to fix ourselves. We don't have to fix other people. It's just learning how to improve and to work with the situation. So like, how do you work with what's there and balance it, right? Like I see so many people try to set up these really hard firm pushbacks when they're overwhelmed that isn't like a balance for the needs of practice either, right? So like figuring out, how do we balance what we need and what the pets need? Because there is a way to do it. It necessitates actually looking at, what's my motivation? Where is this coming from? This pushback coming from? And how do we work together so we can create a balance?
Mm. Can you think of a story or a time when this really demonstrated what we're talking about, especially in a veterinary setting? And personal example would be great, but even if it's something that you've seen someone else do that you've helped them through, I think that might help kind of put it into context.
Yeah, absolutely. I have an easy one. So I have someone I've been mentoring that was struggling. She was a newer grad, right? So she had been out for less than a year and took a job in a small animal practice. And the job entailed like all the clinical duties of a normal practice, right? Medicine, surgery, talking to clients, that sort of thing. And there were a few different aspects of her job that she didn't enjoy, right? So like surgery was one of them. Any sort of critical cases or emergency cases, that sort of stuff. She was struggling with having set boundaries for herself and wanting to set boundaries for herself to protect herself around not doing surgeries or not seeing sick things. And I think that where she was coming from was this place of like, this is really stressful for me. And I'm looking at it as a source of stress. And I need to figure out how to take care of myself in this moment, right? Like, how do I set a boundary so that I don't feel overwhelmed and I don't get burnt out? But she's trying to create this setup for herself where she could contain it, essentially, right? And one of the things that we worked on was, okay, so if we do this in this moment, if we stop seeing surgery in this moment, if we stop seeing these sick critical cases, what's that going to give you right now? Okay, so it's going to make right now a little less stressful. Where is that going to put you in 10 years? What sort of vet do you want to be in 10 years? So if you want to be a vet that is just doing wellness appointments, that will set you up for that. But if you want to be a vet that's able to handle those things later on in your career, how is this choice now going to affect that? Because there's like the short-term thought versus the long-term thought. And so many of us are struggling with, in this moment, I'm so overwhelmed and I'm scared. And the only thing I know how to do is to put up the wall, right? And so that's where a lot of that kind of pushback and discordance happens between management or ownership and doctors. It's like, how do we kind of create a way that we work together over these things? Because the answer is not to shove people into things that they're not comfortable with. It's also not to have them avoid them completely, right? So how do we create a support structure that allows them to lean into their growth edge without jumping off the bridge, essentially, right? Because we don't want to send someone who's been out of school for 3 months into a GEV with no guidance. Like, that's not going to be supportive for them. But we also don't want them to avoid surgery. And then the other piece around it is like realizing the different perspectives. There's been a couple times where I've had newer graduates who've been in these roles they've been hired for that are like uncomfortable with a piece of it, understandably so, right? Because it's terrifying when you're out of school and you're learning all these things. And a number of them, when they've been kind of in this place of like unsurety or trying to put up boundaries, it's really easy for us to focus on what it is that we need in the moment and sometimes forget that we are also hired to do a job, right? And so what does that job entail? When someone hired us to do the job, what was the conversation around why were they hiring us and what were the needs that we're fulfilling by doing that job? So I think it's really important that we gain that perspective from both sides because neither one is evil, right? We're all just trying to figure out how do we balance the needs of the system. And in many ways, the system needs to be reimagined, just like you're talking about, Megan, right? Like in a lot of ways, we need to start thinking differently. But the more we can notice where we're at and notice when we're kind of like pushing out the walls because we're overwhelmed or like saying, I don't want to do that because it's scary. Like, what's the point at which we stop growing? And how do we balance that with being authentic and being able to say, like, I'm concerned about this. This doesn't feel comfortable. And I know it's important to the business that we have this service. So how do we create a middle ground where I can feel supported to grow? And, maybe we don't do as many of these things in the first 6 months. How do we create that balance? There's lots of ways to do that. The more we get true to ourselves and understand what it is we need, the more we can have those conversations.
Mm. I hear several different things in that. Also realizing that, yes, it is good to understand ourselves and take care of ourselves, but not at the consequence of hurting everything else, which is either our long-term self, but also we still live in a system, and it's important to understand and work with the people around us as well. So there is I always try to stay away from the word balance, but it seems right. And this one, I just listened to a podcast, and it's not the first time I've heard this, but they talked about how stress is not always a bad thing, that we need stress in our lives. A lot of it is how we look at the stress that is what's impacting our health. So sometimes we get too focused on, oh, we don't want to be stressed. And it's like, actually, some stress is good and extremely normal when you are doing something that is not something you've been doing for 10 years. And so to me it goes into understanding how to communicate. How do I put a language behind how I'm feeling and what I need, and how do I communicate with the people around me to make sure that everybody's taken care of, whether it's the business. Yes, I am here to do a job. How do I work with the job and everybody around me to make sure that we are working together to get everybody's goal achieved? And it also made me think about how important it is to do what you are doing with these new grads. And I know you work with lots of different people, but in these examples, being able to help people find those words, find what they really need. This is like a mentorship skill that is so important in our business. These skills are so important to keep that ecosystem balanced and allowing our people to thrive and be empowered. So as you were realizing kind of the magic of going through coaching yourself and understanding some of these things, what was your decision to study this even more to the point where you would make this your career in coaching people on it?
I think it was really it's like paradigm shifting. Like that's the easiest way I can explain it. So like when I experienced coaching, I think that I was so focused on all the fires that I was trying to put out at work, right? All the firefighting that I was doing, that I couldn't be present for what I was going through. Like it was so very much like I was so externally focused on what needed to happen that I didn't even recognize that I was a mess. Like didn't have a concept of it. And so when I went through it, it allowed me to know that I could both see what was going on around me and help myself at the same time. And the cool thing about it was that what I realized and what I noticed is that the more I got right with myself, the more I was able to actually learn how to feel my emotions and to process them and to work with them so then I could communicate in a way that was connecting as opposed to polarizing. It made everything else easier. So when I was right with myself, I was actually so much more present to what was going on around me. So I had less fires to fight because I was catching things 10 steps ahead because I was able to lean back and observe. So that was a piece that was really huge for me, that transition. And the other thing is that like when you're coaching someone, it's really all about they have the answers within them, right? A lot of people don't understand or haven't done coaching before, but coaching is not about giving advice. It's about helping the person see what they already have inside them and helping them access it. So the coolest thing is watching someone who feels disempowered or feels like they're at the mercy of their circumstances figure out how the opportunities, like see the opportunities to be empowered by like, oh my gosh, I have this thing right in front of me. I didn't even realize it was there. Like it's so cool to watch them shift from feeling like they're in this place of I'm stuck or blaming other people into like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to work with so-and-so on this. It's so cool. Like the energy shift is so dramatic that it feels like an utter gift to be able to witness it. So that's kind of what moved me in that direction. I love helping people see the potential, you know?
I do know that there's a lot of different things out there that have learn how to be a coach or do this, do that. How did you start exploring what was right for you and getting to the point that you wanted to continue to do that for your careers, seeing these light bulb switches, seeing these very drastic transitions because people are realizing it and starting to feel empowered. How did you go about the education process to finally get to the point where you can run your own coaching business?
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you that the first few years of even saying that that's what I did was hard because the coaching industry is not regulated, right? Like you don't have to be licensed like a therapist does. So there's a lot of people out there that say they're a coach that don't have a lot of training, right? So there is the International Coaching Foundation, ICF, is the basic worldwide organization that regulates coaching. And so there are certain programs that are accredited by ICF. So I chose a program that is ICF accredited. It's called IPAC, the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. So that's like a year-long program that is really intense, and it's accredited at different institutions. So basically you do that, and then you go and you sit for the ICF exam. So I chose the path that was the most regulated because as a vet, right? Like I want to make sure that I know. And I think that that's also, it's hard because there's a lot of people that say they coach at work, but they're learning, right? So there's a different level of coaching that happens when you have been immersed in the skills of how do you create safety for someone and take them through this process in a way that is non-judgmental and that can celebrate the win. And part of our job as a coach is to push people, right? So like when you come to coaching, it's because you are in a place where you want something to be different, or what's happening in your life isn't what you want it to be right now. So coaches take people from where they are to where they want to be. Like that's the whole point of getting coaching. And so part of our job is to push people, which is kind of fun too.
When you know the good stuff is coming. Yeah.
But I say that because we all get in our own way, right? So when we get closer to what we want, resistance starts to kick in, right? Like the fear actually gets bigger the closer that we get to that thing that we're trying to do, right? Like think about it like you do a residency, right? And then you have to sit for boards. Like the closer you get to that, the harder it is to actually go through and do the thing because it's like it's culminating to this point of like, oh, I don't know, it's a little bit scary. So a lot of people will stop when they get to that point of like, oh, this last little bit that is going to get me to the place that I want to go. A lot of people will stop because there's resistance and fear. So that's part of like coaching is like you said you wanted this. How much do you want it?
Understanding what it takes sometimes to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think everybody think we say things sometimes and don't always love the challenge that comes with it. It's like, we love this beautiful picture over here. I would love to be a millionaire and sit on a beach, but sometimes the work to get there is uncomfortable. And as humans, we are wired to try to move away from discomfort. So I think it's so beneficial to have the coaches who understand what our potential is. They understand. I've seen people go from A to B, and you just have to do a few of these things, understand yourself, probably a mindset shift for a lot of things to be able to get there. And the beauty of never doing life alone is because we need the people around us to challenge us and then to be there with us to celebrate when we get there. So
Right. And also figure out whether it's still aligned or not, right? Because sometimes we start endeavors that we think we want for whatever reason, and then we get, 50, 70, 80% of the way there, and it's not aligned anymore. So is it truly, oh, we're just realizing this isn't actually what I want? Or is it fear? Like, how do you discern those two things? Is it that I'm shying away from it because I'm scared? Or is it that I'm moving away from it because it's not for me anymore?
So glad you brought that one up because I think that's a huge thing. I know even for me, when you start out doing things, and I've listened to over 120 people's stories at this point on having to make some of those calls and asking. Sometimes it's scary just to ask the question, am I on the right path? And so again, I mean, we can work on ourselves and get a little bit easier each time this situation comes up, but it really does help having those people that you trust to kind of help you ask those questions and feel okay to explore it. Because I think that's it too, is sometimes just even exploring the what if question can be terrifying because we've set ourselves up on this plan. I said I was going to do this. I posted all over social media that I was going to do this. But is this the right path? Is this aligned with my personal values and where I really want to go? So, very good point to ask yourself, am I saying that because I'm scared that that actually could come true, or that this is what it's going to take for me to do that? Or is this truly misaligned that I need to re examine? Did you have a moment where this came up for you, just out of curiosity, or do you see this come up a lot for people? So, going back to where we come upon a moment where we're not sure this is aligned, we're not sure that this is the way we want to keep going. Did that come up for you in your life or career, and or do you see this a lot in people where they need to ask those questions?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. So I guess I'll answer the first question first. So yeah, my moment was when it was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago now. I had done all the work and I got into a place in my business where I felt really good leading. And I felt like the team that I had created was empowered and we were doing good medicine and growing and felt good to go to work every day, which was a huge thing. And I had to decide. I had spent so much time in leadership and personal development. I had to notice what it was for me that was fueling me. And I realized that the medicine wasn't fueling me anymore, which was strange for me, right? Like it was a hard decision to make because while it was easy, medicine was easy at that point for me. But I was spending all of my energy on engagement in leadership development. It was this thing that was just super fun for me. And so I think the thing that was really poignant about that is that I got to a place. I didn't want to make this decision until I had gotten to this place, but I got to the place of enjoying what I was doing, no matter what I was. So I wasn't making a career shift because I didn't enjoy it anymore. I was making a career shift because there was something that was fueling me that was different. And I wanted to follow that. And so for me, that was a huge win because I didn't want to say like, I'm out coming from a place of like, I can't do this. I wanted to be able to know whether I could or couldn't, whether it was right for me or not. And then to feel into like, which of these things that I'm spending all my time and energy on is the thing that's lighting me up right now. So coaching and leadership is what was doing that. And that doesn't mean that I don't love veterinary medicine or practicing, but it means that this is kind of the phase that is really fun and enjoyable for me in the next phase right now, and that I get to choose what it is that brings me joy. And I think that that's one of the coolest things about coaching is that when you have a conversation with your family members or your colleagues or whatever, your support circle around decisions that you want to make, whether you should stay or go or pivot or whatnot, everyone always has an opinion. But there's a reason why they give you recommendations that they do, right? It's not in a bubble. So generally speaking, people have an agenda around, even if they're very altruistic, they always have a want that they have for you, right? Or for themselves related to what you're asking. And coaching separates that out. So you have someone on your side who is truly asking the questions so that you can self-reflect and get the answer that's right for you without anyone influencing you. And that, for me, is what allowed me to make the choices that I did for myself. Because I didn't have anyone else telling me what I should or shouldn't do, or what one thing was going to lead to or not, or how much money I was going to make, or how difficult it was going to be. I got to use my knowledge and what was true for me to make the decisions that I made, which allowed it to be the most aligned decision I think I've ever made.
And it's always what I hope for people is that when you make a change or you make a choice, that it isn't to run away from something, it's running towards something.
Mhm.
And so that's exactly what you described is that you found where you were thriving and happy and enjoying, and you leaned into more of that. And again, it wasn't that you didn't like the practice part and you wanted to run away from practice. It was you just saw where you were leaning in and continued to lean that direction. And I think that goes also to the empowerment and where I would like our profession to always be. And again, not making choices, I just got to run away from this. It is, I'm leaning into this. I'm noticing this is where I'm thriving, which I think this takes a lot of work too, right? It's really hard to see some of these things if you are completely burnt out because you're in survival mode at that point and all you can focus on is surviving, which sometimes means fight, flight, flee, breathe, right? And so asking ourselves these questions often, I think hopefully will help you see those things before it gets to that point. And I've been in burnout before too, so things like it can happen. But as we grow and learn more about ourselves, the more likely way to actually find where you can thrive long term is if you're constantly leaning into those things and not always making choices from fear.
And that can be really hard. It's really hard to say, like, I'm going to stay in this place where I'm uncomfortable until I figure out my own internal stuff that's going on. It's a brave decision to make. And the thing is, if we don't do that, if we just jump ship and go to the next thing, it's going to happen there too.
Yep.
It's going to happen at the next job and it's a job until we figure out how we work with how we operate and how we take care of ourselves.
Yep, it just follows you. And you mentioned that it actually took you a little while to call yourself a coach. So, what were some of the things that you finally were able to feel a little bit more comfortable in this new look for a career?
What were the things that helped me be comfortable in talking about it?
Yeah.
I think that, well, for sure, getting like all of my certifications and things under my belt, so I have the credentials, was the first thing. But I think a lot of it was my own self-judgment around, like, I'm giving up being a veterinarian to do this thing, right? Which I'm not doing. But there was a lot of like, what will people think? You know, like the getting over that was a big thing for me. So what allowed me to step into it was really getting right with the fact that it doesn't matter what people think, it matters what I think, right? So like if I know that what I'm doing is just as worthy as what I was doing, everyone else is going to think so too. It doesn't really matter what they would say. If I believe in it, it is what it is. That was huge. I think also just getting the experience, right? Like a lot of what I did initially was pro bono coaching or like trade and that sort of thing so that I could get started. And then I started doing it for a couple corporations and like having the experience under my belt where I felt like I was really, it wasn't even just being validated because I really just don't like that term, right? Like I don't want to be searching for external validation, but it was more, I was able to see the difference that I was making in people's lives. And so when I was able to sit with that and notice, they just really had this huge breakthrough. And I was able to facilitate that for them. When you can witness like the power of the work that you're doing, it makes it so much easier to then share it with the world. So yeah, I guess a lot of it has to do with just believing in yourself.
And I also hear in that a little bit is these are my personal values that I'm able to see in what I'm doing. And so I don't know if have you thought about words behind your personal values or how do you approach personal values, but also helping other people start to understand that? Because I think that kind of helps you find your core and you can always come back to those things when you make decisions.
I mean, I think from a standpoint of like, how do you find your own personal values? The way that I have gone about it when I have done my own are, and mine evolve over time. So I can't even tell you that I could name them in this moment, but I do think they evolve, is to really sit with what grounds me. So if you are looking for your values, what qualities make you feel at peace, like make your whole nervous system relax, is one thing. And then the other thing is like what engages you, what makes you feel excited, what makes you feel lit up. That I think connecting with those two parts of ourselves is really important. So it's not just about what do I believe to be important. It's also about like, what do I feel physically is important and what brings me to this heightened place of like my light is fully on, like I'm engaged in the life that I'm leading. And when we follow that pleasure, whatever our desire is, whatever brings us to that point of wonder for the world that we're living in, is part of our value structure. So how do we align with that? I think that so often we look at values from an external perspective of how are we going to be acknowledged? What are people going to think of us? But really, the only way to create true alignment is to feel it. So what's it going to feel like to you if you are living in an honest way? What's it going to feel like to you if you are kind? It's really looking at what your lived experience is going to be and who do you want to be remembered as?
I like putting it that way. I think that helps a lot. And when you were talking, it made me think Brene Brown has this long list of values that she talks about. If you can always add your own. But I remember doing an activity with her or one of her certified trainers or whatnot. And I remember them saying, just because you see family and you feel like family should be one of your 3 values, that's not a good reason to use that as your 3 words. It really needs to come from that internal place that you're talking about. And listening to your story and you constantly are talking about watching this transformation in people, watching people realize that they have the power to make their lives happy and thrive. Like those are the things that you were starting to see and you leaned into those values and now you get to do it more and more. And I know we've run out of time, but I always like to leave some space open. Is there something that you've been thinking about or want to make sure that you have the opportunity to say to the veterinary profession before we end?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I think that the thing that I would want to say to people who are in veterinary medicine is that you always have the opportunity to keep realigning with what is true for you, and that can change over time. So like what's right for you in this moment may be right for you for the next few years. And in 4 years, it might be different. And that's okay. It's okay if you evolve as your life goes on. And really like what we were talking about before, like if you're thinking about making any sort of changes in your career, whether it's moving to a different practice or changing, whether you're in clinical medicine or pharmaceuticals or whatever, really looking at what your motivations are in that moment and whether there's work that you need to get right with yourself on before you do it. Because having been in the situation of jumped from place to place, I know from personal experience, and I've witnessed it so many times, that ideally you really want to be right with yourself before you make that move. So that way you can find the thing that truly is aligned with what you want and what you need. Because if you jump from a place of being depleted or from being unhappy or scared, you're not going to end up in the place that's truly aligned for you. So the more you can get aligned where you are with yourself right now and then make that choice, the better off you're going to be in the long run.
Absolutely. It's very natural for us to grow and evolve. Like you said, even our personal values may evolve over time. And in fact, that's something that I hope people would want to happen. So, well, thank you so much. One final question before I let you go. What is something that you are most grateful for?
I am most grateful for in this moment, the fact that so I sold my practice a couple of years ago so that I could focus on leadership and coaching. And I'm grateful for the freedom that I've created in my life right now. My daughter is going into her senior year this year, and my son just started college. And I'm grateful that I have the freedom now to work however I want to work, from wherever I want to work, whenever I want to work. And that means that sometimes I work on the weekends and sometimes I work at night and sometimes I don't work at all during the day. And it's what aligns for me. So the freedom of choice has been really incredible for me in the last few years. And I'm grateful for that.